And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. I'm David Hines. This is our Tuesday edition, and tonight we are going to be talking with someone who is new to our family, Mr. Christopher Ram. He's not new to the general Guyanese audience, but it'll be his first time appearing on Politics 101. So as usual, we show our new visitors, new members to the family. We show them lots of love around here. I want to welcome all of you wherever you're joining from. I think I have a good sense after last night where the audience is located all over Guyana, all over the world. I was touched that somebody last night was from Port Kaituma, all the way up there, and really staying with what's happening with us. And of course, people all across our Caribbean, all across the world, North America, of course, Canada and the United States, and of course, Europe. Lots of people from the entire United Kingdom. We had someone last night who said they were calling in from Glasgow, all the way out there. And so we know now that we have very, very, very diverse audience. And you all know that this is a program that tries to find its niche because, you know, there are several of these programs online now, and each program offers something different, contributing, of course, to the larger objective of keeping our people informed and keeping you on top of the events, but not just being informed, but also offering you analyses, offering you different perspectives, different angles. Because in this age of the internet and all of this big technology, here's an opportunity for us to up our game and to become involved in what is happening in our country, wherever we are. We don't have to be physically in Guyana. We, of course, can keep on top of what's going on. And I'm aware that, you know, you all make the journey. In the evenings, you start here on Politics 101, and then you step over into the ring with Shara Duncan, and then you go on to Mark Benchop, who runs off the night, and then you start the morning very early with Kidaki Amsterdam on the Bostonian morning time. So there are lots of angles at which we come at the news, at which we come at the information. And so I want to implore you to spread the word that we're on tonight, share the link, of course, tell others that we are on here with Politics 101. We know that these days we're saturated with the news of what's happening within the People's National Congress, the big race for leader. Not very often in our Caribbean in general, and in Guyana in particular, that parties choose a new leader. If I can go back to the PNC, they found the leader was Burnham, and when he passed away in 1985, unexpectedly, Mr. White took over. White died in 2002, Robert Corbyn took over, and then he demitted office in 2011 to David Granger. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And now Granger is giving way to somebody else. So from the birth of the PNC in 1957 now, which is what, 64 years, this is the fifth leader. So an average of 13 years per leader, which says something about the way in which we deal with leadership of political parties in this part of the world. The PPP, of course, Dr. Jagan, the founding leader, And then when he passed away in 1997, his wife, Mrs. Janet Jagan, and I said his wife only because that's a fact, but she, of course, was a leader in her own right, whether she was Jagan's wife or not. She was a formidable political person. She took over from him. She then passed the baton on to Mr. Bharat Jagdeo. And he, since then, has been the leader. We know that Mr. Donald Ramotar was the presidential candidate in 2015, and so on. But the fact of the matter is, 2011 was also the presidential candidate. But the fact is, Jagdeo has been the leader. So for all intents and purposes, the PPP has had 3 leaders in its, that party was born in 1950. But let's talk about the present incarnation of the PPP, really is the post-1955 PPP. The pre-1955 PPP, or 1956, let's say 1956, when the second split happened, when Martin Carter, Rory Westmer, Sidney King, etc., left. From 56 to the present, we can call that the present incarnation of the PPP. The PPP, of course, claim 50 to 56, but they shouldn't, because the party from 50 to 56 was really a different party. That was PPP 1. The PPP 2 that we're in now, we can say from 1956. So what? 1956, 65 years. And they've had 3 leaders. So we don't change leaders very much in this part of the world. And if I were to do the same and go through the leaders of the major political parties in the English-speaking Caribbean, we'll find the same. So we have that leadership race in the PNC, and there are lots of excitement around it. 3 major candidates who are on the trail trying to become the new leader. I dare say that that person will become the new leader in a new era of Guyanese politics, and that's the era of oil and gas. I was chatting with Christopher Ram just before we came on air, and I was saying that, we're going to start talking tonight about oil, and he told me that oil is the present and the future, and he's correct. We are into the oil era, and so this will be the first PNC leader in really the oil era. I mean, when the coalition came to power in 2015, it was announced that we had discovered oil, and one should be able to say that Granger was the first PNC leader in the oil era, the first Guyanese leader. But for all intents and purposes, that government did not govern as if it was in an oil era. And so I would like to think that whoever becomes the leader of the PNC will be the first PNC leader in the era of oil. And that's a big deal. And I think that really should be a consideration as delegates pick a leader that they want to think about the new era of politics, the new era of economics for Guyana. I reminded Hamilton Green a couple of days ago that after Burnham died, we entered the era of the post-Cold War era. Burnham died in '85, and we started to see the transition away from the Cold War even then. And by 1989, the Cold War had ended, the Berlin Wall had fallen. And so in a sense, the person who took over from Burnham was the leader who was going to chart the course for the PNC in a post-Cold War era. And I reminded Ahami that he thought that there should have been a different kind of leader for the post-Cold War era than the one that he eventually chose. And that as they are about to choose a leader now, it's the oil era. So that's the big news. Of course, there are other news that's in the air. We are talking about all these other issues, the issue of the proposed amendments to the Representation of the People's Act, the amendments to the elections laws, electoral reform, and the proposals that are put forward by the PPP. That's a big issue, and we're going to be talking to Mr. Ram about that. We are also talking about the stalemate that we are in since October, well, not October, since August of last year, when we had a new government. Some people, most of us on this side of the political aisle, said, well, the government was installed. Others would beg to differ. My own view, as you know, is that we had an election which was inconclusive. As far as I am concerned, the election was too much a tainted election to determine an absolute winner. And so I hold the view that we did not have a conclusive election, and we have a government as a result of an inconclusive election. And for me, that spells trouble, because you are never, ever going to get the opposition to recognize the legitimacy of that government. And as we have seen since then, you're not going to get a government that is going to recognize that it is precariously poised, and so therefore ought to be very careful about how it governs. And so we have had the last 15 months of a different kind of governance in Guyana. Some elements of the old governance, but I think a new kind of governance, a stubborn opposition that is not recognizing the legitimacy of the government, and a stubborn government that is not recognizing that it has a slight majority resulting from an election that was perhaps the most controversial of controversial elections. And so we have not had the government and the opposition talking. And the government has taken the position that it is not going to talk to the government, even it's not going to talk to the opposition, even in instances where it is bound to do so by the Constitution. And we're going to talk to Mr. Ram about that and what are the ramifications of that, what are the consequences of that. And so we have our plate full. I'm also going to ask Ram, if we have time, about the PNC, but that's the PNC race, but that's not what he is coming to talk tonight. We are going to talk tonight about the oil and gas situation, because the oil and gas itself has been captive of our divisive politics. And I want us to understand that, right? That if we don't solve the divisive politics, it is going to have implications for oil and gas. Some people think we can solve the oil and gas issue outside of the politics. I beg to differ. I am going to would like to know how my friend Christopher Ram feels about that. But Chris is, as you know, professionally a chartered accountant, but he is a political commentator, political analyst. He has his own TV show called Plain Talk, one of the longest running TV show in Guyana. I know it's been around for at least 20 years. As a person who has appeared on that program often, I think it's 20 years and running. And Ramad has his own view on the elections of 2020. He was very much part of it. He's a lawyer. He's an attorney at law. And he had taken that case challenging the no confidence vote and the behavior of the coalition after the no confidence vote in December 2019. And he made a statement recently, and I want to be very careful here because I'm in the presence of a lawyer, something to the effect that he took that case to court not to put in place a government that is going to frown on the rule of law. Not his exact words, but I think I captured there the sentiments. And he was responding to President Ali's stubbornness when it comes to meeting with the opposition leader to deal with constitutional requirements such as the constitutional commissions and the appointment of a substantive chief justice and acts of the judiciary and so forth. So we are in for a treat tonight. Share the link if you're just joining in. Tell others that we are here and buckle up because tonight's show is going to be of the top quality. Not that we don't have top quality shows every night here, but tonight is going to be a special night. Mr. Christopher Ram, welcome to Politics 101.
Thank you very much, sir.
We do long preambles here. I know you do a long preamble, but I've always endeavored to do longer than you. So if you may pardon us. Chris, I made reference there to a statement that you recently made, and I hope I quoted you correct, or at least captured the spirit of what you intended to convey.
You did. You did, sir.
And tell us what prompted such a sweeping statement from you.
Well, this issue, and it also links to the rule of law, because you can't have all these acting appointments for it's over 15 years. But the thing is, we don't seem to be making any progress in this country. You get statements, and what particularly prompted that statement of mine by way of a letter was something about meeting. There is absolutely no requirement strictly for the president and the leader of the opposition to meet. There is, of course, no requirement for them to recognize each other. But they hold those positions. They are constitutional positions. And having accepted the positions, then they must act within the powers and the duties that are vested in them. I was making the simple point that if President Ali was serious about dealing with this question of the acting appointments, all he needed to do was write a letter to the leader of the opposition to say, look, I have consulted in the profession, in the society at large, and I propose to appoint X and Y as Chancellor and Prime Minister respectively. I hereby invite your agreement, or if you do not support my position, please tell me why. It's as easy as that. But our society is not an easy place. We complicate just about even 1 and 1 equal 2. And I don't want to go into the majority of 65.
Why do you figure so? I mean, it may seem an obvious question for those of us who have been studying the complexity of Guyanese society and politics. But for the purposes of our audience, your perspective on why is Guyana such a difficult place to deal with?
Because in Guyana, political power means economic power. It means control of resources, and not necessarily in the sense in which Forbes Burnham talked about controlling resources and the commanding heights, but is who controls the purse and who can do what they want and who can reward their friends and their cronies and their party colleagues. And that has happened across administrations in this country. Now, I'm not, I don't claim any credit as a social scientist of any sort, but so it's it's just tit for tat politics. And all we want to do is to make sure that we control the levers of power. We have a constitution that in some ways defies the rule of law, is the antithesis of the rule of law, because all persons are not equal in this country. Different rules apply, and even constitutionally. So you think of what's happening, a government, what is the power of the executive? Does the power of the executive extend to taking money and handing it out willy-nilly? Who draws that line? Does the power of the executive mean creating 20, 30 ministries and appointing an average of 10 advisors to each of those ministers? And in some cases, you know, we have 2 and sometimes 3 de facto ministers operating. So, David, I think it has a lot to do with our history. And I am disappointed that after the advent of the AFC, which appeared to have had the opportunity to change the trajectory of politics in Guyana, we have lost that moment. And I am not entirely sure that that opportunity is going to return to us. We had the joinder, which managed to get a seat. Had they not done that, they probably would not have had a seat. We would have had maybe 33, 34. And, you know, it is a continuation. Is this, despite what Cheddi Jagan said, and you spoke objectively about Cheddi Jagan, but he spoke about winner not taking all. And what did he do when he got into power? Essentially, winner took all. And his party has drifted in that direction. And so has the party on the other side, whether it's the PNC, PNCR, the APNU plus AFC, whatever you want to call it, the culture. And David, I don't think, unless we have a serious rethink of our political structure and how and our political personalities. You know, former President Jagdeo is a relatively young person, but he's steeped into the old politics, and I think that can keep Guyana back. Irfaan Ali is also he's probably one of the youngest presidents. Maybe he was, I'm not sure his age compared with Jagdeo when Jagdeo became president. But we're not seeing that vibrancy. We're not seeing the new paradigm and the new thinking emanating from our politicians.
Chris, and those are very candid statements. And I've always pointed out to this audience that even in a place that is divisive of Guyana, there is still what I would call an independent space. Small, and some of us try to squeeze into that space. But the divisiveness of the politics means that we are pushed out of that space by the group who perceives us not to be independent in their favor. And so therefore, we tend to think that we don't have an independent space in terms of our perspectives and our analysis of where we are. We may not have an independent space in terms of actual party politics electorally, but I think at the level of analysis, we have always had a kind of independent space. And in my own biased way and in my own study of our political sociology and political history, I usually say when there was a split in 1955, not all the African leaders went with Burnham. Martin Carter, Sidney King, Rory Westmus, Keith Carter, except Chester stayed. They left in 1956. And I remember Kwayana telling me that while Carter and Westmus and others drifted out of politics, he stayed in politics because he felt that there were people who looked to him for leadership. And I like to place that moment and Kwayana as what I call the independent strand in our politics. Now, Kwayana joined the PNC, but he left the PNC. In fact, before he left the PNC, he was thrown out of the PNC for taking an independent position. Many people don't know that Kwayana was expelled from the PNC in 1961, and he never rejoined, although he supported them from 61 to 71. And it was that independent strand that became the initial base of the WPA. If there were WPA had a mass base, it was that base that Kwayana took with him, that independent base. And I think it was that independent strand that gave birth to the AFC that you talk. And I think there's always been that independent strand that is there in the politics, but it gets smothered, I think, by the sheer weight of the divisive politics. Now, having listened to you, some of us, certainly myself, and I know Vincent Alexander, we felt that in the midst of all of the contrariness, in the midst of all of the convulsions, in the midst of all of the confusion last year in that 5 months, that those 5 months presented us an opportunity to stop and to reset and to look to see that if out of the smoldering months that we could not have charted this kind of fresh way. But of course, there were others who felt that an election is an election, and an election has to have a winner. And we proceeded. I think we've not seen you there. We've seen just the top of your head. Oh, there you go, your angle is back. Right. No. All right, that's better.
Okay, let me don't touch it.
There was the other view that an election is an election and you have to have a winner, that an election is not the time to look to see if you can find consensus. I would like you to comment on that.
David,
if you can tilt it a little bit, because we are still not seeing you. All right, there you go. A little bit. Yes.
Let me see.
That is excellent. Right, there you go. Yeah, if you can comment on what I just said there.
You said a lot, but
yeah.
I'm going to deal with the question of the 5 months. Now, it could not be to anyone's benefit for election results not to be known within a matter of a day or two at the very, very most. We're a small country. We've got about 400 plus electors, and we've got 2,200 polling stations. We have 10 polling districts. The mechanism was there. I don't share your view, David. Nor does the courts share your view that things went on. Now, no election is clean, but I and many others, we went into the polling booth, we voted. It was really a well done election. But I don't want to get the point I'm making is this: that 5 months served to divide this country further. It made political parties on both sides hostage to those who had money and who could sustain a campaign and who would then expect payback following the whatever installation or whatever of the government. I am very critical. I have been. The PPP became dependent on the private sector, and the private sector is now almost calling shots when it comes, or it's allowing things to happen. But it might be a small clique, but it's still the 5 months did a great amount of damage. And even if we talk about the rule of law, the courts ruled on this matter. How can we then turn around as responsible citizens and talk about installation, not in the ceremonial sense, but as though someone went there and picked maybe the chess piece up and put it there, or that the results were inconclusive? If we think about it, think of the numbers. The numbers were well within the range of what everybody expected. We don't have, I don't think for the next 10 years, we will see any party getting a majority of, say, 3 in this country. The dynamics are changing, the demographics are changing, and it's very difficult because we have lots of new citizens in this country. But I believe the 5 months only served to harden the divisions in our society. It has made it possible now that we have a president and a leader of the opposition who don't feel they need to talk to each other, and the business of the state and of the country and of the people is being sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. And I think it has been a very, very damaging thing. I spoke up about it, and I spoke up as a concerned citizen, a term that you don't hear a lot about these days. And I just want to say, David, you talked about things, how things, our political culture might have changed. It has changed in the WPA as well, because we used to look, as a society, we used to look to the WPA, the Red Thread women's movement, and that type of progressive groups to take the lead on behalf of the ordinary people. I have not heard anyone talk about this disgraceful minimum wage in the private sector. Minister of Labor Hamilton sought to move it, and the private sector spoke, and he was shut down. That's the kind of control the private sector has over this country now.
Yeah, and Chris, you're right. But the point I'm trying to make is that persons, at least for me, I didn't have to wait to see the PPP in office and to wait for 2021 to know that that's what they were going to do. And so therefore, I thought, given that both parties were accusing each other of stealing the election, it was a good time to say, okay, so both of you all said election thief, let's have both of you all come together and let's talk here about running this country together, at least in an interim basis. So as to avoid the things that you were saying there that the PPP is doing right now. And so in a sense, the court says that, the rule of law says that somebody won the election and we have a government and here we are. And my question is, if elections are throwing up these kinds of government and we cannot not have elections, where are we left as a society?
David, you're right. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay. We do have serious issues. Too many people have gone quiet. Money is being handed out. lawyers are refusing to take lawyers' calls because they think, look, you won't get me in trouble for bringing an action or something like that. That's what's happening. But David, we must not give up hope. People like you cannot and should discourage by any means necessary falling into a negative mindset. Look, whilst elections have consequences, and we know, unfortunately, because we have been timid in dealing with constitutional reform, and we still have winner take all, we also have Article 13. And Article 13 says, and incidentally, Article 13 has been elevated into a fundamental right. People have a right to participate in decision-making affecting their social, economic, and political considerations. They should be consulted, for example, on oil to gas, or on gas to shore. They should be consulted on a miler. People should be consulted on the West MR. They should be consulted on practically everything. That's what they do. They're consulted by way of representative democracy, parliamentary democracy, and popular democracy. The tragedy is we have very little. We have a parliament that went on recess, and you can't even find anybody. The speaker was probably somewhere looking at cricket. That's the kind of culture we have. We do not have the opposition. They did get, the PNCR did get the coalition 31 seats. Has it used the 31 seats in the interest of the people? The answer is no. You hear the leader is on leave. Then the leader of the opposition is as quiet as anything. That's, an opposition is your alternative government. It should be there. It should have made noise about, I see they're now picking up on about oil and gas audit. They should have been putting out their own ideas on electoral laws. They have done nothing. Granger discovered oil in 2015, one of the largest finds in the world, and then goes on to lose the elections. That to me was a mixture of incompetence, divisiveness, exclusionary democracy. We have a real problem, and it is not limited to one side or the other. And you said earlier you're giving up on Guyana. You can't do that, David. You'll be throwing water on me.
We were just chatting backstage. I was just messing with you. I will never give up on Guyana. If I were giving up on Guyana, I would not be interviewing you here tonight. Let's go to the issues, Chris. The previous government, the coalition, was hammered for a bad contract. They were hammered for hiding the signing bonus. The consensus on those who were the experts on oil was that they did a bad job. The expectation was that the new government coming into power would have corrected those anomalies, would have corrected the situation. Have they done so? And if they have not, why not?
It's always difficult to get into people's heads concerning motives.
All right.
We know they've done nothing. In fact, they have endorsed and condoned and supported the things done by the APNU AFC coalition. Let me say this, David. That agreement that Trotman signed in 2016 was an agreement created by the PPPC government in 2012. Robert Prasad, under the Donald Ramotar administration. The tragedy of it was this, that Trotman applied a pre-discovery contract to a post-discovery situation. Now you have the vice president and the ministers and so on saying, oh, sanctity of contracts. We ought to be calling, the opposition ought to be calling for a commission of inquiry into this oil fiasco. Because you read the Clyde and Company report, it's a damning indictment of the PNC. That the PPP does not want that known raises serious questions about its own interest in Guyana as opposed to some other interests.
But Chris, as you said, the contract, if the contract that Trotman signed, they have now come into power and they're doing nothing with that contract, it must be that they agree with the contract, no?
Well, the vice president talked about the sanctity of contract. Well, David, I don't know what is sacred about it, a contract that is riddled with illegalities.
Yeah, but of course he is being disingenuous. If he's saying the sanctity of contract, there are lots of things the coalition, lots of contracts in other areas the coalition got into that they've come into power and ignored or kicked out. So there seems to be this notion or principle of the sanctity of contract only as it relates to the oil contract. No?
Well, the thing is this. We understand that contracts, multi-million, thousands, hundreds of thousands contracts are being signed by the PPPC administration. We're not saying those contracts. So the very kind of secrecy, and you're right, Trotman misquoted and misapplied the law to say he didn't have to disclose anything. The PPP is doing exactly the same thing in many, many ways. So, it's hard to avoid a comparison rather than a contrast between the PPP and the PNC. Because yes, there might be areas of emphasis that can be different, but the overall approach, and if you take the time period, they've run Guyana just about an equal period of time since independence. And we are no better off. I come back to the rule of law. We have so many sections of the Constitution. I don't want to mess things up, but there are so many statutory bodies. David, it is so long. Let me give you a couple examples. The Judicial Service Commission, the Public Service Commission, the Teaching Service Commission, the Police Service Commission, the Parliamentary Standing Committee for Constitutional Reform, for Natural Resources, for Economic Services, for Foreign Relations, Teaching Service, the Women and Gender Equality Commission, Indigenous Peoples Commission, Rights of the Child Commission, Public Procurement Commission, Public Procurement Tribunal. None of these things is functioning. And which one of the governments or which one of the parties calling for any of them? Neither. And that is a disgrace, David. And you should call those things out as well. Of course, you're my host, so I need to be careful. But how can we, David? I've actually got a list. And nobody cares.
Chris, let me put this question to you. You are right. The elected opposition has a right to be more aggressive in holding.
Has a duty.
Yes, has a duty to be more aggressive in holding the government on. But I am arguing strenuously that those forces, either through political opportunism or through a reading of the rule of law, who were responsible for making the case for this government being in power, they have an equal responsibility to hold this country, to hold the government accountable. Don't you agree?
I agree, but if they don't, then does that mean the others do not?
No, no, I'm not saying that. I am agreeing that
Look,
the opposition has a duty and responsibility. I'm
but
saying those who help to push its government into power for whatever reason, they also have an equal responsibility.
David, I could not argue against that. And I worry when you look at some of these contracts. I mean, here's the absurdity. The cabinet gives no objections to a contract negotiated by the government. I mean, how much more absurd can you get? And you don't hear a squeak from the opposition or their spokespersons. I'm not only talking, David, about the PNC or the APNU. What about all these persons who were saying, and with the information they had at the time and the way it was being communicated, they may have had absolute justification in believing that things were going wrong. Have they lost their voices, David? Have they lost their sense of national duty? So, who do we blame? It's such a sad situation. It's depressing. You get the same voices. You have just a few people. There's an organization called Article 13 that is trying, but part of the problem, I believe, you see, David, the government controls so much in this country. If you are some little social organization, you can get a contract for hundreds of millions of dollars by just saying the right thing.
Yeah,
that's the tragedy of this country.
Yeah, but Chris, for the record, before you go on, for the record, Bernal and the Kaitro News, they take a strong position against what's happening in the oil sector.
Absolutely.
The Village Voice newspaper takes a strong position. What's his name? Winston Jordan, the former finance minister, holds the government to account to the point where they're trying to silence him. Those of us on these platforms, we do, in our little way, hold the government accountable. No?
Of course, but not enough. Not enough. And I think some of these matters, we have got to keep them. Glenn Lal does a good job. Page 7 of the Kaitro News about being blunt. He goes on television. He has made almost a crusade of this matter, but we need more. We need our national organizations like the Private Sector Commission. Don't they see anything wrong with giving hits and jams a contract? They've never built a dog kennel, and they're going to build a $346 million school. How was that cost arrived at in the first place? But so all this money, and David, I know that there's nothing about economics we're talking, but what is happening? We are already borrowing heavily, as Winston Jordan said the other night on Plain Talk. We are borrowing heavily on future oil income.
That's right.
And that's dangerous. And not only are we return that makes sense, at least financial sense, but you have not even done that. You just talk, oh, electricity can come down to half a cent, or I mean, it's all a pipe dream. Somebody's head needs examined. But the question is, how do we move towards a stronger position? I take some hope. I saw a short letter in the Stabroek News the other day that the headlines are going against the government. There are too many missteps. So every government, AUC Kwayana said, give the young man a chance. You remember those famous words?
Right.
Speaking about Jack Deo. Irfaan Ali has had now about 16 months, I think, roughly 16 months. And people are starting to question, look, how effective is Irfaan Ali? He's not even respecting his oath of office when it comes to upholding the Constitution, which is part of your rule of law. If you look at the preamble of the Constitution, David, embracing the rule of law is one of the fundamental principles of our Constitution. If an ally is guilty of breaching that, the PPP is guilty of breaching that. Of course, the coalition government was also guilty of breaching that.
We seem to have lost Mr. Ramsong there.
No, have you?
Okay, we've got you. Chris, let me pin you down to some specifics. We
Sure.
know as a result of all the bad decisions that have been made about, I'll give our audience a sense of how much money we are losing per year because of the mistakes that have been made. You're a man of numbers.
David, it's difficult to say we don't know cost of production, so we don't know profit. The using objective estimates and independent third parties, Global Witness talked of a minimum of $55 billion arising out of that contract. So you were talking of serious and real money. Now, a lot depends on what assumptions you make about the price of oil. How long is oil going to be a popular fuel? So, but it is totally clear that we're losing millions and millions. You see, one of the first take out of any money from oil is to give back to the oil companies. They don't risk in an economic sense. They don't risk a penny because they are guaranteed to get back their money.
Right.
They, for example, in the 2016 agreement, all the expenses they incurred from 1999 under the Janet Jagan ill-advised petroleum agreement, all the money that they spent, they have to get back, and they get the first claim, subject, of course, to the 75% cost oil in any 1 year. So
in the ballpark, I mean, we can't know exactly so much, but give us an average of how much we could be losing as we speak.
I would prefer not to give a number because, you know, for example, they said that they figured $9 billion is being bandied about. Now, should that $9 billion have been $6 billion? Now, that's where the audit comes in, David.
The audit, very good.
We ought to have had audits. If you look at the agreement said that on or before April 30, 2017, Troutman should have audited all the figures, including the figures from up to 2015 and then moving on to 2016. He did not do it. And that was certainly much more than $1 billion. But it does not mean that every single cent is wasted. You're not going to get oil for nothing. Investors come, they expect a return. But the only way we can deal with this is that you have to have a competent audit carried out of their expenditure. Instead, because we are keener that we pump as much oil as possible, this regardless of how it affects our environment, regardless of how it destroys the fishery. We want these people to pump oil. And they said, Mr. Hess said, it is the best agreement on the planet.
On the planet. But Chris, when we're talking about we're talking about two governments. You just mentioned Troutman didn't do the audit. This government, what are they doing about the audits?
Well, they have virtually reneged or resiled from doing an audit as well.
Yeah, and pardon me if I keep doing that, because we have to do that. Because I think we have to make clear that mistakes were made by the previous government, and those mistakes are being replicated by this government. As you know, the effects of that are probably even more devastating today.
Well, yes, because you know the expression, you have to make the best of a bad deal. And the government, you know, I've said this to the people in the government, have a commission of inquiry. And if the commission of inquiry points in the direction that, look, renegotiate this contract, you have a duty to do it, and you have a good basis to do it. But the PPP, in my view, is not interested in good governance in the oil sector. If it was interested in good governance, it would have reactivated the bill on the Petroleum Commission. But what happens? Oil is now solely in the control of one or two persons. That's not what governance, that's not what rule of law, that's not what responsible management is all about.
Who are those two persons that are in charge of the oil?
Well, you have the minister himself. Well, I would say you have to have three persons, because the Petroleum Ministry actually comes under the president as well. But so right. You have the president, you have Vikram Bharat, and you have the vice president, Bar Jagdeo. And it's clear that the real voice in all of this is Bar Jagdeo's.
All right. Let's shift a little bit from oil. I remember you and I a few years ago, when just after the right sizing of the sugar industry by Gaisuko, and you and I went across to the West Bank.
That's correct.
We went to the school there, and you were distributing some resources to families that were affected.
That's correct.
By what happened at Wales Estate. And I'm recounting that because the PPP forget that people like myself were critical of the way in which the government handled that thing. So I'm only referring to that. But I want to ask you that whether you think this move of giving $250,000 to each sugar worker who was displaced as a result of that move by the coalition. And then on top of that, giving them or promising them that they would get some high-paying jobs in the oil industry, setting it aside for them, training them for it. Is that move a fair move on the part of the government?
I would say it is not sufficient thought and sufficient debate had not taken place in our society. I do not begrudge the sugar workers having some resources to send their children to school, put some bread or roti on the table, whatever. But we cannot be discriminatory either.
There we go. Because when we were over there in the West Bank, both you and I were saying to the media that were there, that when you're making these big moves, like, you know, right-sizing the sugar industry, you have to look at the social implications. On that day, you and I went into some of the communities and we look at the roads there and the conditions under which sugar workers lived on the West Bank. And we felt that we had to be careful lest the government is not being charged with discriminatory behavior.
That's correct.
And here we are, 4 years later. The very government that was charging that government with discrimination is now opening itself to the same charge. No?
Well, you know, David, I think that thing had a lot to do with politics.
Tell me.
Than with just helping these people. Look, the PPP went in to the election saying, we will reopen their states. They now realize they cannot reopen their states.
Bim, bim, pim, pim. Good.
So they're buying the silence of those people who would have said, you broke your promise to us. Let us not forget that Jagdeo said, even if I have to roll up my sleeves, I go in and fix Kellan. He went to that region to announce this $250,000. So it's, you know, and you've got your public servants, you've got so many other sectors of society. We have bauxite workers who have been laid off, not by the state, but by a company in which the state has an interest. We don't treat those things. So politics, and when
politics getting in the way of policy.
It absolutely. And you know what happens, David? The last occasion becomes the benchmark, and then 250,000 to sugar workers. And then what next? We've got away with it. We did not debate it in the National Assembly. We haven't gone to say, look, of course the money has not yet been paid. Let's be fair. And you may very well find it in the budget. So we wait and see, but it still lowers the bar to good governance in this country and responsible financial management.
Lowers the bar of good governance and responsible financial management. Christopher Ram, who is a chartered accountant and a commentator, has been speaking a lot about oil and gas, has been speaking a lot about the rule of law, and here tonight being very candid. And as some of you have been observing here on in the comment section, that Mr. Ram took a position that the government won the election, the party won the election, and that they should be installed in office. But here he is, being very critical of that government that is ensued from those elections. Chris, let's shift gears here, and let's talk about the proposed amendments to the Representation of the People's Act. Some journalists, and I have spent the last week or so going around the world and looking at elections laws and penalties for offenses at elections, and I cannot find any country in the world where the penalties for electoral infractions are as harsh as the ones that are proposed by the PP. Now, you're a rule of law man, so you obviously would agree that we need reforms. We need to look at minimizing electoral fraud. But do you think those amendments are intended to, in a very objective way, reform our electoral laws? Or do you think that politics have gotten in the way of real reforms there? Talk to me.
You know, David, I am extremely disappointed, to the point perhaps of being angry at the amendments that are being proposed. I don't wish to denigrate anyone, but maybe it's the Lowenfield Mingo amendments. It's just to prevent those, to say that, look, if these things happen again, but that was a symptom of our electoral practice, and we have it's not even picking the low-hanging fruit. We have not touched on the critical issues dealing with elections. Where is campaign financing? Absent. Where is constituency elections absent. Where is the center, one of the major problems? And David, you and I have spoken a lot about this. Your guests will probably think that we have a love affair, but we've just known each other for a long time. Our problem has to do with the fact that you've got a dysfunctional elections commission, and you had at that time a paralyzed chairperson, and I don't mean to denigrate. It's not in that sense, but she did nothing at all. It's one of the few countries, as you said, and I'd love to hear your elucidation. It's one of the few countries where the political parties control the electoral machinery.
Yeah.
We've done nothing about it. Now, if these two parties are serious, they could alter that by a simple 2/3. When I say simple 2/3, they do not need a referendum to do that. So campaign financing is one of the worst things we've got. Now, Sheila Holder, and you know, we've got commissioners who defend allowing political parties to spend as much as they want because they say, oh, the law is anachronistic, the amount is unreasonably low, so we should ignore it. So those persons who can bankroll the politicians and elections are the persons who have the real voice, and we need to be careful. It doesn't deal with the question of access to state media, if we're going to have a state media. It's just about it seems to have been focusing on the theft of elections. I don't think that's going to repeat itself for some time.
Mm-hmm. So you think, go ahead.
So it is a poorly conceived set of amendments to the electoral, the constitutional, and the statutory arrangements governing elections in Guyana.
But you mentioned that the two parties can come together and deal with this. Wouldn't it have made sense for the PPP to call the opposition in and said, look, let's start the ball rolling by talking about some proposed amendments that we all can agree on?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I also believe, and I'm trying to persuade persons. You know, David, we used to have our own thing. I remember at Bishop's High School, etc. We would that part of the WPA. I am trying to persuade one organization to have a public discussion on those amendments, which is what the PPP ought to be doing, not sending soft copies and say, you can get it on this website and give us your submission within 6, I can't remember the period. Sorry?
Yes, I think 6 days. I think no more than 6 weeks. 6 weeks?
Yes.
Yes.
But David, that is surely, it not only is the time inadequate, but it's the method of the message. We should be having the same kind of consultation that you had on for example, when we had the National Development Strategy, where you went around the country. That's the kind, or even on earlier attempts at constitutional reform. So,
Chris, I heard the Attorney General on a program with Demerara Waves on News Talk Radio, and he said there will be irreconcilable differences, but these will be settled in the National Assembly.
Well, apparently, you know, David, I have the highest regard for the Attorney General. He works hard. He's pretty bright. He knows the law. But the problem is when these guys get into politics, when they have to say things politically that they may not believe intellectually or professionally. And that happens. I saw him say as well that, look, this is subject to amendment. But that's only because I really do believe that they did not expect the criticisms, the stridency of the criticisms and the unison in which they were expressed. You know, just about everybody has said, what are you doing, guys? This is not real. This is not what we were thinking about. But again, they're going to use the majority and vote it. Now,
and when they use the majority and vote that in, and as we are saying here, the consensus is that it is more about politics than about real reform of the system. Where does that leave us as a society?
Well, I think
the opposition.
I think this is going to be another flashpoint, because it's going to say, look, you know, Rupert Ryan, I remember him speaking at Tower years and years ago when I was receiver Tower. And he said Guyana is a country of missed opportunities. I think this was a fantastic opportunity to deal with this vexed question of the constitution of the Elections Commission, the whole method of representation, the constituency system. I believe Article 11B is illegal. Section 11B of the Representation of the People Act, I believe it's illegal, the one that requires you to contest in at least 6 of the regions representing 13, at least 13 electoral seats in the National Assembly.
Yeah.
I believe, and I am hoping that if this process, I don't call it a reform process, it's a tinkering process. If this tinkering process doesn't deal with that, I think you're going to get legal action for, you're going to have courtroom action, and you're going to have popular action, because people are going to say, look, you can't do this to us again. And given the nature, the divided nature of our society, we should take steps. Everything we do should not only think about our own supporters, but what do the supporters of the other side, how would they perceive this? Is it fair to them? If we can only start putting ourselves in the shoes of the other side, I think there's hope for Ghana. But when I think so emotionally, intellectually, and on the basis of reason, I am less sanguine.
Yeah, Chris, you are right. I think that we are a country of missed opportunities, and the point is, where do we begin? Which missed opportunity do we begin to say that
this one? This one. You can't undo the past, but you could fix this one.
Well, you're right. I mean that's where I was going. I mean, we can't go back to the past, but the past is really a prelude, in a sense, to what we're seeing, in the sense that it is very clear from all of these missteps from the people, they have read their mandate to sweep in unilateral terms. And we can go back to the coalition and we can make the same criticism of the coalition, though they did not read their mandate in such sweeping terms, but they made missteps too. And the point is, at what point do we stop? Now you take something like the National Registration Act, and the elections laws. Those two things are not synchronized. And so therefore we have had problems. One would have thought that any serious reform would include something like that. The courts couldn't do anything about it during the 5 months. Look, you can say what you want about those 5 months. Those 5 months revealed the weaknesses in our electoral laws. It revealed weaknesses in our electoral practice. And look, one may say that we should have had a declaration of result in 4 or 3 days, so on. In a sense, I'm glad for those 5 months. We still have Christopher Ram, the recount order and what that recount order threw up. People don't like to talk about it. It supposedly will form part of the elections petition if ever we come around to dealing with that seriously. But just as somebody saw something at Ashmin building, somebody ought to see something that was realized by that recount exercise. What do you think?
Well, we were just not talking about how do we move forward.
Yeah.
I am not persuaded, and I'm guided by the decisions of the court, David, on the question of the elections. As you know, the law provides for an election petition.
Yes.
Election petitions were presented. I must say, I don't think it was a very good job was done. I think it was some carelessness, but there's the issue as well that an election petition ought to be held from day to day.
Yes.
It has to be treated with urgency.
That's right.
And it has not been. And, nobody says anything. So as I said, I've said this before, and you know my position. I'm not persuaded that the government is improperly elected or installed. And I do believe that what we need to do, the Caribbean Court of Justice has recognized, has pronounced on the matter. What we need to do is to get this government to understand that it's operating with a limited mandate, that it has an obligation under Article 13, that the president is sworn to uphold the Constitution, which is now carried out when you look at all those commissions.
Yeah, but Christopher, I can live with that. I can live with that formulation, that we need to get the government to understand that it's operating under limited mandate. I know opposition people are saying the government was installed. I know that we have to have a government. I am not oblivious to that. We can do that. But it is, I agree completely with what you are saying, that the circumstances under which the government came to power should have said, look, our mandate is not big and sweeping. It's a limited mandate. And that in itself should really push the government to be a little bit more circumspect in which, in the manner in which it is governing. We're not seeing that. The opposition has not used its formal legal muscle. And I think there are muscles there in the formal legal system. It has not used that effectively. When one brings that together, the society is left hanging. Don't you agree?
It is. We continue the division that we've always had. We make absolutely no progress. As you know, one of the things I didn't mention, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on reform, constitutional reform.
That's right.
Dead. But what does one say? Who do you blame? Equally, do you blame the media? Has not made much noise about that either. But sometimes a country that is so blessed, we almost want to reject our blessings and say, no, we don't deserve to be so lucky. We have some of the most useful forests in the world, and we have all these natural resources with a population less than 800,000.
Yeah.
And yet we are going to make a mess of this. I don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned the media, Chris. I mean, the media have not made much of noise on many things, but that's another story. A question for the panelists: given the attempts to reform the Constitution, and the outcome so far revealed or realized, what is Mr. Ram's perspective on the value of a full constitutional rewrite that addresses the model of governance, outdated laws, and eliminates any remnants of colonial legacy? That's a big one there from David Modest, Chris.
Thank you, David. Good question. You know, someone was telling me today, if you were to do an economic analysis, we are worse off now vis-a-vis the Chinese than we were when we were a colonial state run by the British. The Chinese control just about everything. They've into your Buxton village. There's every village. They seem, I know in one area where they were almost a law unto themselves. So to talk about colonial heritage, we're getting a different form of colonialism, and it's probably more ruthless and without any conscience. I do not think we need a complete rewrite of our constitution. We do have a number of guardrails in the constitution, but we have some weaknesses. We need to move away from this system where the president is a superman. And you know, that's the same model that Burnham wanted. He wanted to be, he must pay no taxes, nobody can take him to court, and all these things. Now, some of that have been changed, but still the fundamental structure of the constitution, where the president practically has the power, he's part of parliament, he's the executive, he's just about everything. So we need to reduce substantially the powers of the president. We need to make sure that there are some failings. We must be able to call for the recall of ministers. A minister who sells our country out doesn't deserve to remain there simply because he belongs to a government that can't be removed by way of a recall motion. We need to strengthen this whole business of the recall motion. I don't know how you think about it. The US does not have recall. We do. I think the threat of recall can be very useful.
Right. I mean, some states in the US do have recall. I mean, the Western states, and those recalls were put in the state constitution by the progressives at the turn of the 19th century. A lot of people don't realize that. Arizona.
We had one recently, practically.
In California. Right.
You're right. So I don't think it's an impossible task, but you need the constitution itself is structured in such a way. Some of the provisions can be voted on and therefore amended by a simple majority. Other provisions can be voted on and be valid if approved by 2/3 of the National Assembly. Now, when you have, maybe it's good that we don't have anybody who can sit down and get 2/3. Otherwise, you might get a complete rewrite in the name and face of a single party. And you have some articles of the Constitution that require you to go to the people. We have to deal with this question of citizenship, and the president is the only person who has to have some kind of a residency requirement. Voters don't. They want to stay in the States and fly in by a vote kind of machinery. We do have to think of some fundamental things. We do have the talent. If we can say that we've got a whole diaspora unit now, I believe is in foreign affairs. We need to consider what role would the diaspora play in the development of Ghana. And if you want to vote in Ghana, are you prepared to pay taxes in Ghana? Do you want to have any kind of residency requirement? And that too, David, is part of the challenge which I believe the Attorney General does not want to face. What does he do about these persons? Can we then have a list maybe every 5 years? And if you're not here, you're automatically struck off the electoral roll. Those are some of the discussions that we have to take place. Yes. We have to begin. The question is, who does?
Who does? Look, Chris, my audience, our audience here, then 3 cents. Here's one for you. Mr. Ram, don't you believe that it should have been the PPP carrying an election petition? They thought that they saw irregularities.
Well, the election petition is usually brought by the side that has lost. You're not going to win and challenge the win.
Yeah, but what the call is carrying you back to the early days when the PPP said, here is fraud. But
Yes.
some or the other, they were not told then, take your accusation of fraud to an election petition. What happened? What happened?
Well, do you know, David, do you know that there's an election petition against the 2015 election results?
Yes, I know that.
And so what, as part of this electoral machinery reform, that's something that we should have dealt with. We talk must meet from day to day, but must meet from when? So
yeah, but Chris, don't get away from Vibert question. Why, if the PPP saw, they said, we have seen irregularities, why were they not told by the court that let the election be, the results be declared and take your accusation of fraud to application? What happened?
which election we talking? Which elections we talking
2020.
about?
2020. Yes.
2020 was addressed in so many court cases that it's almost impossible. I don't want to plug anybody's book, but Anand Gulsaran has done a good summary of all the cases. The PPP took the matter to court.
There you go.
They took various actions in court, and the thing is, they won. So
right.
Why would they have an election petition? It's a practical matter.
But don't you think that then sets a precedent that now parties, instead of waiting for a petition, are going to go to the court, and we are in for now a series of 5 months whenever we have elections? What do you think as a rule of law man?
Well, I don't think that, as I said before, I don't think that we're going to see a repetition of that sort of situation again. I certainly hope not. I would like to think that our elections are going to be free and fair. I think it's very important. This abuse of state resources at the time of election. But I have a difficulty, David. I'm not running from the question. I have a difficulty in thinking, why would you wait? Why would you have an election petition if you have won?
No, but you haven't won yet. You haven't won yet.
Are you saying they should have allowed Mingo and Lowenfield to proceed with a decision? Is that what you're suggesting?
The caller is saying that the logic is that if you think that you are being cheated, you are usually told, take your accusation of cheating to a petition. That did not happen when the PPP said, we have seen fraud. They went to the court, and the court ruled in their favor, and they've won. And the caller is saying, the caller is asking implicitly, is this going to be the new trend that if a party thinks it sees fraud, it's not going to wait for an elections petition, it will go to the court and seek to have the court said to win or you lose?
Well, I think it's very important that you understand, and I'm glad I mentioned Gulsaran's book, because it has a good summary of the cases and the principles.
Yes.
The point about this, David, and look, I believe that the court is there to resolve issues of law. We need to have some kind of political culture, some convention. But as a practical matter, if you think a fraud is going to be perpetrated, the first thing you do is try to stop the fraud.
Right.
If you can't stop the fraud, then you use the other step of the
Right.
of the petition. That's all.
Right. And that I'm saying, is that going to be the new norm?
I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. All I can say, I hope not. As I said, those 5 months did enormous damage. You know, if you're living outside of Ghana, it's easy to take a kind of emotional interest in the country. We live it, we feel it, we pay our taxes here, we see our money being wasted, we see incompetence, we're surrounded by incompetence. It's not a good feeling.
No. And Chris, all I'm saying is that if the next election, the PNC thinks that it sees a PPP mingo and it goes to court and stretches it out for the next 5 months, isn't that conceivable?
Well, that you've raised it means it is conceivable.
Thank you. That's all we're saying here. That's all we're saying.
But,
So, Mr. Ram, my friend, look, here is what we've done here tonight. I've been very clear about this program and as it is evolved. This program was conceived when I felt that opposition voices were not being given coverage in the wider media. I really think the media compromised itself, the established media. And so a show like this was born in order to give. But as you've noticed, I think it is time for us to evolve. And that is why I brought on Mr. Ram tonight. I don't think Mr. Ram is on the other side, meaning PPP. His views may coincide with the PPP, but I've known Chris for a long time, and I know he's an independent voice. And I'm going to move now by bringing some independent voices on. Because as you all have noticed tonight, that the fact that you've brought on Mr. Ram, it has brought out some very interesting questions. There's not a way in which if a PPP man were sitting here, we would have been able to deal with some of his questions. For example, Ram said that, look, he believes the government was lawfully in place, but he sees the government's mandate in limited terms. I think that's a very important observation. Those of us on the opposition side should pay attention to. You see, in polemics, political polemics or any polemics, it's not all or nothing. Sometimes we have to be able to see ways in which people who do not agree with us 100% agree with us 40% or 50%. And what that does is that it opens up the discussion. And so in a sense, we have broken some ground here tonight. With your permission, I'm going to bring more people like Mr. Ram on, not because I agree with everything or you would agree with everything that Mr. Ram says or believes. But I think Mr. Ram has said enough here tonight to spark a wider discussion. In a sense, we have been speaking to and with ourselves, among ourselves, people with like views and like perspective on what's going on. Tonight we have moved it a little bit. And I think that that is good for the discourse. Chris, any closing thoughts? Anything that you really wanted to say that my questions didn't allow you to say?
Not at all, David. I was quite pleased with the program. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience. I think we need always to be guided. The struggle continues, and wherever you are, you have a contribution to make. I would close by just asking you, please stay safe, stay healthy, observe all the protocols of COVID-19. It has touched me very personally with my daughter being a victim of the COVID-19. So, but she's doing well. She's asymptomatic.
Thank you very much. And, you know, on behalf of Politics 101, we want to express our concern. You know, we're all a subject. We're all in the way. We are all potential victims. And at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we help one another to stay safe. And I know your daughter. I know her since she was a toddler, and now she is a university student, and of course, part of our future for Guyana. Please, please. I'm glad that she's safe. David says a very open, informative exchange of ideas. Great example of keeping the channels of communication open. Thanks to Mr. Ram and Dr. Hines. Chris, you know, in the old days when we do things, I give a vote of thanks. That's the vote of thanks there from David. And you know, sometimes I think people who are not vibrant to ask the questions as Mr. kindly bring Mr. Ram in soon. Sometimes we're afraid to hear other views, and that's part of what Guyana does to us. You know, it forces us in this cocoon, support this new direction that the program took tonight. So thanks, Mr. Ram, for appearing tonight. This is from Desiree Simmons, one of our faithful viewers. Like I said, sometimes the politics drags us into corners, and I understood that there was a time in which I needed to stay in a particular corner because, as you know, Chris, I come from a political culture that says if people their backs are against the wall, stay with them and give them comfort. And I think it was very important for somebody like myself to do that. Of course, I've earned the wrath of people on the other side who think that I've become super partisan. But you know, we've been in this thing long ago. Christopher, no one is perfect. He's maintained that posture throughout. These are some of the comments, and this is a tough audience. Eh? I mean, they got people on the opposition side who don't want to face this audience.
Right. My friend Everett.
Chris and my friend Chris up in Alexander Village. Yeah, Chris is Alexander Village and Everett Leonard. Right. Yes. Thanks, Chris, for coming on tonight. Politics of 101 is doing a good job educating Guyanese and informing the world about our problems. John C. Paul, thanks, my brother John. John and I work together in Coffee 250. Hope we can resuscitate Coffee 250 and resume the work that we used to do on the ground. Again, Chris, thank you for coming on, and I'll be having you back soon. And I'll take up your offer that we really need an informed panel to really examine that those electoral reforms. Yes. You know, because of the COVID thing, we may not be able to do it on the ground, you know, the kind of thing the WPA used to do, but we certainly can do it on a platform like this. Limited, you know, but I think we can go somewhere. You would be certainly one of the persons I would want on that panel. Thank you very much, Chris.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, operator. Thank you, viewers. Good night.
And thank you, viewers. And as you notice, the button is come up there to support our program. I know you believe in what we're doing and support Politics 101 in whatever way you can. I know you have to stretch your support because there is not one program. There's several of us who are doing the same work. But please do remember Politics 101 when it's tight in time. Some of you have been generous in your contribution, and I hope others, please remember Politics 101 as you set aside those 2 pennies whenever the month comes to help to keep these programs in line. I see you back on Thursday. Lincoln Lewis is going to be back on Thursday by popular demand. And young Sherwin Holder, who is vying for a position in the PNC, he will be on to talk about his candidacy. Sherwin Holder, as you remember, came on during the Orange Boston shooting. He was on about 2 or 3 or 4 times on the program. He will be on Thursday to make his plug for his candidacy. So please come on Thursday to hear what the young man has to say. I like him. I have to confess. You all know the people I like. Manza, I like Sherwin, I like Tabitha, and so on. I wear my love on my jacket. I wear the jacket tonight, as you all notice. You all notice, right? So Sherwin is going to be on, and then the second part of the program, Mr. Lincoln Lewis will be on, and next week we are going to have some hard hitters coming on, as the candidates are announced who running for which position in the PNC. We are going to try to get some of them on next week. Thank you all very much. Stay safe, stay informed, and stay true to your beliefs. Good night.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.